and it was just starting to get light outside. And I was laying there laying on my right side, and I was looking at David. All of a sudden, I just had something push right in, touched my left thigh, and just kind of came right back out. I immediately started shaking David and telling him, David, something just touched me. It was not the nose of an animal. I have a pretty good sized hand for a female, and I would say it felt flat and about the same size as my hand.
If you listen to Bigfoot Crossroads, you may remember episode 137. I think it was called Sasquatch Meadow, where I talked to a couple of lifelong friends, Curtis and David, about some of their experiences revolving around their interest in Bigfoot. Well, they're back, and David's brought along his wife, Kandy, to share some of their experiences from this past year and to find out what has happened in almost exactly a year. It's crazy, guys. Welcome back. You've had quite a year in between shows. I feel like it's just a couple of bookends to your life from my perspective, but you guys have had a lot going on.
Yeah, we have. Thanks for having us again, Matt.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Matt. It definitely has been an interesting year.
So let's rewind back to one specific thing that I think kind of stands out in my mind. You guys talked about a guy named Will Ulmer and how you had reached out to him, but hadn't heard anything back. And you were really hoping he would respond and everything. And now you guys have gone out into the field with him.
Yeah, twice. So I'm sure you remember that we were introduced to you through Jonathan Brown,
right?
After I had commented on one of his videos and Sarah's videos that we had something similar to an occurrence that occurred in one of their videos. And after a couple of conversations, he reached out to us and asked us to eventually film a video in near Gypsy Meadows with he and Sarah, and then obviously he introduced us to you, and we were on your, as you said, podcast number 137. And in the meantime, he and Sarah contacted Will, and Will came in on the trip in June, and then, as it turns out, David and I were planning on going back in August, the last week of August, which we got back just a couple weeks ago, and David invited Will along, and he came. So we've now spent a couple of trips at Gypsy Meadows with Will.
Now, I'm sure you guys discussed it. David, did your notes kind of line up with Will's notes on the area?
Yeah, he had never been to Gypsy Meadows before that. He had wanted to always go there, and the other YouTuber that went up there, Marshall White, he had wanted to go there also. So Will had invited him up for that trip in June. But he'd been in the campsites down below that, going down to Sullivan Lake quite a bit, and they'd had quite a few, videos and documentation from down that area. But in Gypsy Meadows, he hadn't been there before, but was excited to come there for that trip. There are definitely a lot of things that happened to him that he told us about, and it did, a lot of go along with what we had found, on our trips too. But these last two trips with him have been pretty good, together, being there and experiencing some of these things together, and it's been pretty amazing.
Is it starting to paint a picture of the activity in the area with, his experiences that he's had down below there, and now the stuff going on there? Are you starting to be able to kind of put in the missing pieces of how it's working there?
Yeah, he thinks it's coming from into the wilderness area. There's a mountain across the creek that goes up. He thinks they're coming from there and they're crossing over and coming through that area. He says that area, Gypsy Meadows, has been, as active or more active than almost every other area he's been at. So he's been excited to come back there.
Curtis, I wanted to ask you about the owls.
Yes, the owls.
there seems to be something pretty interesting happening at this location involving owls. Would you mind explaining kind of what's going on with that?
Yeah, so in 2024, we went the exact same week that we went this last week in August, but both in 2024 and the June trip and this last August trip, weird stuff seems to happen around owl calls. And, the barred owl is definitely around there. And, perhaps a lot, if not most of what we heard were barred owl calls. But back in 2024, barred owl calls seemed to sort of disintegrate after a minute or two, and they turned into whoops. So we've had a lot of time to think about it since then. Either our theories are one of three. Either it's all barred owls and we're completely mistaken, but that wouldn't explain the whoops. And then, as you remember, David heard Sierra sounds associated with the barred owl calls as well, and that would not explain that. Our second theory is that Sasquatch is mimicking the owls, and then at some point starts other vocalizations that kind of reach out to others across on different parts of the mountains around the meadow. And then the third one is that maybe they're not mimicking, maybe they're just using the owls to try to mask their calls, and they wait for the owl to finish, and then they make whoops and other calls. So either as long as we're not completely mistaken and they're not all owls, it does show some level of intelligence. Either they're mimicking owls or they're using the owls to sort of cover up their own calls.
So kind of walk us through your first trip back to the meadow this year.
Well, it was really good. Curtis, like Curtis said, John Sarah wanted to film us. So we tried to, coordinate with them, and we figured out probably the best time would have been in this last spring. The snow that was up there was, pretty thick. So we didn't get to go up until June. This last, back, when we went back up there. But when we went up there, like Curtis said, Sarah and Jonathan invited, Will Omer, he was Grassman 58, on YouTube. And I guess the reason she said, that was kind of his area of research. And he also had a lot of stories she wanted to interview him about also. So he was willing to do that. And that's when he invited Marshall. And we also met Marshall White. And his YouTube channel was Bushcraft Explorer. And then another friend of his came up, Aaron West. So we all got together and we basically took over the whole meadow and all the campsites in that area. Will and Marshall showed up on Wednesday, and Sarah and Jonathan came in on Friday at that time. So it's such a long trip for us that we decided, hey, let's go up earlier. We're going to have to drive 2,000 miles. So we might as well, go up and maybe do something in Oregon before we go up. And so we decided to go up and maybe, head to Mount Hood or do something in that area. My wife Kandy had an interest in Bigfoot with my interest, just everything I've been watching, and she wanted to go on the trip. And then with her coming, Curtis's wife Terry decided she would go too, but she couldn't, come until later in the week. So we scheduled her to fly into Spokane, and we picked her up. But I might let Kandy describe, how she got interested in that.
I would say for me, it's been all the years for watching the BFRO guys and other videos that David seems to like to watch around here about 2 or 3 hours a day. And so it kind of sparked my interest. You see a lot of them and you listen to their stories, and sometimes you're just like, that just sounds kind of hokey, and I'm not so sure, I can believe in this. And, you have the 100 questions, how come they've never caught one? How come they've never found one? The bones, all those questions like that seems everybody kind of tends to have when you start talking about Bigfoot to anybody. I love camping, so I really wanted to go. I wanted to see what all the hubbub was and just get out and experience it with my own eyes and my own ears.
As Kandy said and David said, we're traveling up and we decided to probably go around Mount Hood. But on the way up, David and Jonathan were texting, and Jonathan had told us that Sarah had just been in a campground in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest on Wednesday and Thursday, and we were driving up on Saturday. And while she was there, she heard a number of vocalizations, and Jonathan actually sent us a recording of that we heard, and the people who were there were sort of surrounded by things in the campground that were doing various vocalizations. So he gave us the name of the campground, and we decided to kind of go there to begin with. They weren't going to show up till Friday, and Will and Marshall weren't showing up till Wednesday, so we had from Sunday till Wednesday morning to kind of go there. And as it turns out, apparently Jonathan told us later that after Sarah had left and right before we actually got there, the camp host, his name is Michael, called Jonathan and said that with all the vocalizations that Sarah had heard after she left, the next night he was sitting in his trailer and he started hearing monkey chatter right outside his trailer. So because of all of that, we decided to go to that campground first before we hit Gypsy Meadows.
Yeah, so on the way up, we're driving up there. We decided to stop by the North American Bigfoot museum that Cliff has up there in Portland, and that was pretty amazing because they have all the everything they present is done really well. All the evidence and prints that we've all seen are there. And so, I'd suggest anyone who's interested, go there and see that. It's pretty good. But that first night camping, we met the camp host, and he verified to us that, yeah, he'd heard that monkey chatter back behind their camp. And the latest was his wife had heard again that same type of clatter the night before we arrived while she was watching TV. So our first night, we heard a vocalization at around 12:30 and 1 a.m, and they came from across the road. But they, again, were like barred owls. They would begin, but then they would change and became a high-pitched howl or scream. So we got it on a recorder, and because Sarah had sent us the recording of what she had heard, we listened and started comparing it, and it seemed to match one of her sounds, almost exactly. So that was kind of interesting for us to see it.
Yeah, and getting back to the barred owl, just interestingly enough, where we were in Gifford Pinchot Forest is probably 200, maybe 300 miles from Gypsy Meadows, and yet in both places the barred owls seem to play a role. After that first night, the next morning, we decided to go kind of exploring, and we drove further up the road from the campground, and we found a Forest Service road that we decided to take. And about a mile or a mile and a half up the road, and we hadn't seen any cars or anything. This was a weekday, and I don't even know if the schools were out yet. But there was a sort of a cleared out area off to the right on the road, and it was probably about the size of a drugstore parking lot. It looked like maybe a place where the Forest Service used to put equipment or stage in case there was a fire. There was this huge cleared out area, and David pulled into it because on the sides of the cleared out area, there were some softer dirt berms where all the dirt had been moved, and he wanted to look for prints. And so he kind of parked halfway into the cleared out area. We started walking, and the first thing he noticed at the end of the cleared out area was an X structure. Now, it may have been natural, it may not have been, but we got closer, and right in the middle of the cleared out area, something or somebody had placed a log, because everything had been cleared out except this one log. On top of the log were 4 rocks that were stacked on top of each other, and then on top of that was a branch that was balancing. And I'm not saying this couldn't have been done by a person, but it was interesting. It was essentially right at the level where the X was. And then David started searching close to the X on the softer dirt. He ended up finding 2 14-inch prints with a 50-inch step length right there. And so we ended up scanning those with our scanner. And then David was going to cast them. So he went to get his casting stuff. And while he was doing this, up on the ridge above us, I started hearing, and I couldn't tell what was being said, but it sounded like women talking back and forth. And this probably lasted for about 30 or 40 seconds, and David heard it as well. I think Kandy may have heard it as well. And there were no roads going up to that ridge that we could tell, or trails, and this was on a Forest Service road. So that was kind of interesting while David was getting ready to cast, to hear lady chatter that we couldn't quite tell what was being said. So it kind of almost, I don't know if it was a foreign language or we just couldn't hear it loud enough, but it was just a strange occurrence, all associated with this area where the print and the little structure in the middle of the cleared out area, and then obviously the X structure was close to it.
Kandy, what was your take on all this as it was happening? Because this is all new to you. and here's a couple of guys just, listen, those owls, and there's some sticks. So what were you thinking whenever all this was happening?
Well, the logic is no, a human had to do that. That just had to be a human. But then the more you walk around and the more you see things, the hearing of just strange things that you just can't seem to, I don't really know what that is. It sounds different. It's odd. We're out in the middle of nowhere. And so while David had found the 2 prints on the side of the hill, and the prints were actually coming down towards the little road that we had driven up on, I decided to walk straight across to the other side of the road, and I actually found 2 more prints.
Oh, wow.
So then I had them come over, and they measured them, looked at them, and I believe they were the exact same length. Correct, David?
Yeah, they were. So it was kind of interesting that that was exciting for her to find. Now she's found something, and that helps her in her journey, all that. So I went back and I was casting the best print I could find on the other side where I initially found them. And I think I sent you a scan of that print. Yeah. For that and stuff. But that was kind of exciting for Kandy to find that.
So the answer to your question was it just seems like almost every hour, then another hour, there would be something that would be teasing me a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And it actually made me where, okay, what's going to happen next? I was looking forward to the next night, the next day. It was becoming very interesting.
I have never heard anyone use that word before to describe it. Teasing. That is a very good word to describe it, because that's exactly how it happens. Just like you're saying, you just get these little teases that just keep you hooked. And I can't help but think, for people out there who say that, well, I've been in the woods all my life and I've never heard or seen anything. And, these things couldn't be out there. I honestly think it's just like you were talking about. It's whenever you start paying attention to those things instead of just writing them off as, oh, well, it was probably just a person. Yeah, you can just think that and go about your day, and it is just a person. But if you really start thinking about it and start examining the location and thinking about it from a logical way, you start realizing, like, well, now hold on, it could have been a person, but it probably wasn't a person. Those 50-inch strides, you said the footprints were 50 inches apart?
Yeah, it was. There are 16 inches in length and 5 inches wide. And then, but that from the first step to the next step, we measured out at 50 inches.
And those are going downhill?
Downhill, so it's probably on flat ground, not quite as far, but still, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
It was, it wasn't like a real steep angle, but I'd say, probably about a half a foot elevation change from one footprint to the other.
And coming from the direction of the wilderness towards the road?
Yeah, this area was like a cleared out area in the middle of the forest. So there was like a mountain on, ridge on the side it was coming from, and then the open area with the soft dirt and the road, and then the soft dirt on the other side, and then it went back into forest. So it's kind of like a rectangle cleared out right in the middle of the forest. And so there was no other roads coming into that area. So it was just like, I go, hey, let's go check that area out,
Was there any signs of like vehicles or anything out there that you guys could tell?
That area there were signs of vehicles that people, the trucks had been driving up and down when they harvesting the wood from there. That it was, all old stuff, and there was nothing above it for anyone to go. It was just up the side of the hill that this opened.
And just to kind of put the area in perspective, I'm sure most people have heard the story of the 2 Bigfooters who passed away on Christmas Eve, and this was essentially in the exact same area. It was essentially just across the road and maybe a mile from where those 2 guys passed away this last Christmas. So it's a known active spot in the area.
Yeah, we can make note of that. That's not giving too much information away. I don't think they ever released the exact location details of where they found their bodies or anything, but that area was known to Bigfooters already as an active area and has had activity since then, obviously, which is why you guys are here talking about it right now.
Yeah. And, some of the locals, we talked to a couple of the BFRO people when we were up there, and they had done they were having a camp out the next weekend, but they were up there kind of prepping for that. And Jonathan got us to talking to them. He told us that they'd be up there, and they had done some research talking to locals. In fact, one of the locals, I think, was on your podcast, 151, and they call the area Skookum Valley and Skookum Mountain. And the locals told the BFRO that there were a number of Sasquatch in the area, and most of them were pretty docile, but one of the males was known as an ornery Sasquatch, and he often tried to throw rocks at tents and tried to bluff charge and get people to leave the area. So whether that had anything to do with the 2 unfortunate guys or not, nobody knows, but it is just kind of interesting that the locals say there is a mean Sasquatch in the area.
Yeah, I think I had heard the same thing. Something about a certain area not to go into for sure. Near there at a certain, either at night or a certain time of year or something like that. Which you find that fairly often, actually, these areas where they're known to be. It seems like sometimes there's two different groups or two different types of behavior going on in the same area. Whenever you talk to locals, if you get access to locals with that sort of information. But again, like you said, I don't want to imply anything. I'm not saying that Bigfoot had anything to do with the tragedy of those two guys losing their lives or anything. It just all seems kind of odd. And then whenever you take into consideration the stories from the area, it's worth noting. Always be careful whenever you're out there poking around, messing with these things.
Yeah, definitely. With that, well, the other thing that we found, you get back that a little bit, was I was casting that, let it harden. We went up further on the road and I found a structure on the right. And I think I sent you a picture of that. And what caught my eye was that all the big part of the branches were up and the small was down. And I go over there and look, and they're like jammed in the ground, leaning against this tree. And I find another, a game trail going right around it, making a right-hand turn at this structure. And I follow that down the road, and there was another X structure across the road from that. So it just seems like these things are like signs, of markers for these guys.
Yeah, it's really weird. You seem to find them just by coincidence in areas that have Bigfoot activity reported.
Yeah, definitely. But so we had gone down this road where, a local had told us where that activity had happened that Christmas Eve, and we went down that road, and Curtis was walking ahead of us about 100 yards, but then Kandy had an experience there.
Yeah, we were walking through, it was, I would say maybe we were 100 feet, 150 feet maybe from the road. And Curtis had told me, "Hey, Kandy, do a whistle." So I said, "All right." So I whistled. And within a matter of maybe 3 seconds, we got a response. So I did it again. Same response. So then they were like, "Okay, do it one more time." So I did it for a third time. Got another response. And it copied my whistle. It didn't just whistle back. I whistled, I did and I did it 3 times, and each time it whistled exactly the same back at us.
Wow.
So that was pretty interesting.
I mean, what does that?
I was like, did someone lose one of their pet parrots or something out there? I don't know. But it was definitely mimicking me.
And just to put that in perspective, we had driven back on another side road when that happened, and we were probably 1.5 miles to 2 miles in, and we never passed another person. Like I said, this was the first week of June. I'm not sure many people were out camping. So could it have been a person? I suppose, but as I said, we never saw anybody. And if it was a person, they were wandering through the wilderness. So,
I mean, people don't do that.
Exactly.
If I'm out in the woods and I hear somebody whistling, I'm not copying their whistle and doing it back at them.
Right, exactly. But David found something interesting as we were driving out.
Yeah, so I think Kandy was a little excited that she kind of was surprised that she got those whistles back, but it was kind of getting dark, so we decided to leave. And on the way out, I saw a tree break on the right-hand side of the road, and I was like, hold it. So I stopped and got out and went over to start looking on it. As soon as I got over by the tree, all of a sudden I just got this feeling, I need my gun. And so I come walking back to the truck, what's going on? And I said, I just need my gun. And so I got it, put it back in the holster, because I'd taken it out while I was driving. And walked back and started investigating, and Curtis got out. We went over and looked at this tree break, and I think I sent you pictures of that. And it was pretty fresh tree break. It's still, not a lot of leaves on it, but it still had some green leaves at the, end of the part that was broken. And so then I started looking around. There's a game trail leaving that, and we walked back in there and found a small meadow, and I could see where something large had walked through the meadow, like tramped down grass and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'm glad I got my gun, on here. But that was just a few hundred yards, from where Kandy had been whistling. And so that was a interesting find on the way out.
Put that in perspective, for your listeners, I've known David for 55 years, and I've never seen him get that kind of feeling. He's 6'4", he's a black belt in karate. I've seen him, just kind of get in between people when they're fighting and just, stop a fight just with a look. And that, that doesn't mean that he could handle a Bigfoot if a Bigfoot decided to attack us by any means. But for David to get a feeling that he needed his gun, most people probably wouldn't be impressed by that. But that really impressed me because, like I said, I don't think he's ever had a feeling like that in his whole life.
You said the grass was like tromped down in the field. My brain is just trying to process that. That would have had to have been a fairly short amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to look. I really tracking is one thing I try to do. So I was looking for it. It was, you can see in certain things, you can see shine,
right?
When it's fresh, and it was. You could see it. It didn't happen that long before, and you couldn't see prints in it or anything like that. But it was definitely this trail going through this small meadow. It wasn't like a big meadow. It was probably 20 yards wide by maybe 30 yards long. Curtis, would you say? Yeah,
it wasn't big, but there was definitely something that had been there.
They walked through that away.
Relatively recently.
And all of this, and you guys haven't even really gotten to camp yet.
We hadn't gotten to Gypsy Meadows yet.
Yeah, right. And there's even, I hate to say it, but there's even more in Gifford Pinchot. I mean, we ended up going the next day up another Forest Service road. David could tell you about that.
So yeah, we're still in the Gifford Pinchot Forest, and so we had another day. So the next day we go up and we drive another forest road because we enjoyed what we did the day before and all the stuff we found. So we go and we find this old road. It was awesome. I mean, it was an awesome road. I mean, but it was gated off, so like the road was, old, and the grass was, it was like growing up and overgrown and things like that. You could walk down it, but there was no trees, and it was pretty easy to walk down it. So it went for about a mile up that area.
Yeah.
And so we're walking along, and as we're walking along, we usually try to, I call it tactical. Like walking with Curtis, we'll stay in one spot and look, listen, and watch while I walk ahead about 20 yards, and then I stop and he comes back up, and I'm looking, listening, watching while we do that. And he heard something interesting as me and Kandy were walking forward. I'll let him tell you that.
Yeah, so it was probably 5 times in a row. David called it tactical walking. I kind of call it leapfrogging. But like you said, one of us will walk, one of us will stay and then listen. And every single time that David and Kandy walked forward, and it didn't seem to happen from what they said when I walked forward, but so maybe it had something to do with Kandy being there, I don't know, but every single time for about 5 or 6 times in a row, they would walk forward, and there was a ridge right above us, probably 30 feet high, and I heard something every single time. As soon as they took off, it took off as well, and essentially paralleled them along this road. And then we started hearing some other crazy things. We heard rock clacks and a few other things. And then David had an idea going back to his interest in Native American culture, and he was trying some things. Once I'd caught up with him, I told him that they were being paralleled. He decided to try something interesting.
So the last few months before this trip, people always ask me and say, "What are you going to do? Because you're getting close. What are you going to do when you run into one? Are you going to run? Are you going to what's going to happen?" And my answer is, I want to communicate. I want to try to communicate. And then I ask myself, how are you going to do that? What are you going to do? And with my Native American history, I started thinking, and what came to my mind was, if these things have been around and all the Native American tribes in the country have different names for Sasquatch, they've interacted with them, they traded with them, they had, names for them, then maybe these Sasquatches have watched Indians, because Indians communicate with each other with sign language.
Right.
And it's a losing trait of Native American Sign Language. So the last few months, everyone's been laughing at me or whatever, but I've been studying Native American Sign Language and trying to learn that. And so when I'm out in the forest with that happening, I try to, I do Native American Sign Language to the woods, to the forest, thinking that maybe they're watching, and then maybe they can, see that I'm trying to communicate with them. So that's what I tried to do when we heard that they were paralleling. Someone was paralleling us. I was doing some communication with Native American Sign Language.
I mean, that's better than pushing Kandy towards the sound.
She was.
Well, that did. Yeah, she was the best.
And I was considered the bait, but I took that on quite willingly.
Well, and like I said, it didn't happen when I would leapfrog them. It only happened when David and Kandy walked forward. So that is kind of interesting.
I find the sign language thing interesting because, like you were saying, the different tribes had different languages, obviously different dialects and everything. But at one time, they had to be able to communicate with other tribes that didn't speak their language or whatever. And there was kind of a universal sign language that all the tribes shared, especially in geographic areas. And if you study language and culture, sign language happens before spoken language. So it stands to reason that if these things do have a language of their own, which a lot of people theorize that they do, that they would have also had some form of sign language previous to that. And like you were saying, probably at one time were able to somewhat communicate with the Native Americans that they shared a home with. So, yeah, I'm all down for the sign language attempt. Did it produce any results?
Haven't seen results. I can say that, but you're going to hear something later on that I question if it caused a result. But we'll get to that when we get to Gypsy Meadows.
And one last little thing that happened that Gifford can show to us, and why we're so lucky to have all these things happen. Like you said, maybe it's because we're paying attention, but our last night there, we the campground we were in sort of had a circular road that went around the campground, and most of the campsites were on the outside of the circle. There were a couple on the inside, but nobody seemed to be camping there. And we had heard a couple of nights in a row, as David said, some calls and whoops and one scream and the owls and that kind of thing. Our last evening was right around sundown. The sun was just going down, and we were all just kind of sitting in our camp relaxing, and all of a sudden we heard a whoop, and it seemed to be very close, like it was in the circular area of the campground, which was dense forest. And I would guess that the loop was maybe 3/8 of a mile around. And as soon as we heard this whoop, we kind of looked at each other, realizing that it was close. The previous calls we had heard seemed to be coming from the hilltop across the road, but this was maybe 200 feet away. And so we all grabbed our stuff, and Kandy and I went into one of the open camp sites in that center portion. And David started sort of slowly walking through the forest. And Kandy and I didn't really find anything in the campground, but we went in there because it was open and we thought we could look around, and we didn't find anything. So I quickly backed out, realizing that David was going to be walking across the center. And I kind of jogged around to the opposite side in case he flushed something out. And we probably looked around for about 20 minutes and never found anything and didn't hear any more sounds. So either if it was in that center portion and made that loud whoop, it was either hunkered down and hiding and we never found it, or we had flushed it out earlier. But that was sort of our last big thing in Gifford Pinchot, except that at 3 o'clock in the morning that night, David and I both heard something walking through our campground. But as it turns out, it never ended up on any of our game cameras. So whether it was a bear or something else, I don't know. But something sort of walked between our two tents, which were about 50 feet apart. So those were our experiences in Gifford Pinchot, and we haven't even made it to Gypsy Meadows yet.
There was one thing that I didn't mention, was that when we were coming out of that road, I don't know if you remember that, Curtis, but we heard that rock clacking, and I went and I grabbed 2 rocks and I clacked back.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I got responded back 3 times, with my rock clacks, and so I go, "Yep, there's something up there," and it's clacking rocks back at me. Because every time I would clack a certain number, it would come back, and so that was exciting.
And it was copying the number of clacks.
Yep.
It was just like copying the whistles that Kandy did.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm trying to think, like, why would a person be up there clacking rocks together? Obviously, you need hands to do that. If you were just hearing something natural doing it, it wouldn't copy the number of times that you did it.
No.
Right.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah. I would say I would stick that feather in my hat for sure.
All that's making Kandy more excited,
Yeah. So we finally, on Wednesday morning, drove to Gypsy Meadows. This is our June trip. On the way, we picked up my wife, Terry, at the Spokane airport. We kind of got to Gypsy Meadows middle to late afternoon, and Will Ulmer was there along with Marshall White, and then their other friend, Aaron West, came later that day. And that night, we were just kind of getting settled into camp, and they came over for a campfire, but not a lot happened. But about 1:30 in the morning, I was awakened by a knock that sounded pretty close to my camp. I kind of listened for a while, and nothing else really happened. The next day, they had heard your interview with us, and so we kind of showed them some of the areas where things had happened to us in 2024. And then that afternoon, David was taking a nap, and something interesting happened to him.
Yeah, so we had taken him up and showed him where the X structure that we had seen the year before was, and came back, and I decided to go get in my hammock and take a nap, and I'm just laying there, and all of a sudden I hear this thud of a rock like right behind my head. It was like within 8 feet of me, and I was like, who just threw that rock at me? So, and I get up and look around, and I'm looking for this rock because I know that I heard this thud, and all the rocks except for this one that I found, they're all embedded in the forest bed. They got pine needles all around, the dirt on them. It's all like that. But this one was totally clean, and it was right where I thought I had heard this thud. So I know that was the rock that had hit there. So I pick up the rock and I throw it up in the air to hear what it sounds like when it lands again. And it sounded exactly like the thud that I had heard, when I did it. So I remembered your comment from our last thing, and I said, "Okay, I'm taking this home."
Yeah.
Yeah.
We never took pine cones home from.
Yeah, we didn't take the pine cones, but I said, I go, Matt reminded me I needed to take my trophy home, so I took that and I sent you a picture of it on my mantle.
It is now a decoration in my home.
Right.
Always fun whenever somebody unknowingly asks, "Why do you have this rock?"
So Will, Marshall, and us, we had the whole meadow taken up, and we had a spot for Sarah and Jonathan when they come. But right before dinner, about 30 minutes, from after I had the rock thrown at me, Will and Marshall were sitting in Marshall's camp, and all of a sudden they hear these owl hoots go off, and then a real loud knock from across the main road up the ridge where, the previous year we had heard something, the Sierra sounds had gone across the camp from where we were camping this time and up the hill back in 24. And that's where they heard this. And Will comes over to get us and said, "Hey, we're going to head up and follow this. We just heard this loud knock up there along with these barred owl sounds." So we grabbed our stuff and we went across there. And you have to go through some, forest, about 200 or 100 yards of forest to get up to the main road from the camping area. And right when we got up there on the main road, we heard two low grunts that, like woo, woo, and Marshall, is right behind Marshall's camp up in that area. So once you go across the main road, we started climbing up the mountain. And about 75 feet up the mountain, Will found another X structure. And this was kind of in line where our X structure had been that we had found the year before. And so we couldn't see it from the road, but when we went through all this brush, we get up there and here's this X structure there. So we kept climbing up another probably 50 vertical feet, and it was pretty steep, angle, about 50 to 60 degrees. Will, from where Will found his X, Curtis found something that was really interesting there.
Yeah, I kind of, we're climbing up, and I decided to go sideways instead of go vertical at this one place to kind of get around a log. And when I went sideways, I came upon a little outcropping of rock and dirt, and it was maybe 6 feet wide and maybe 10 feet long. And in the outcropping were these fresh pine boughs, and they were all arranged in a circle. And in the center was a depression. And the depression, for lack of a better term, looked like, butt cheeks where somebody had sat. And I called Will over and David over, and we're looking around, and nowhere around it was anything like that. We looked at the rest of the forest floor. There weren't these fresh pine boughs even just scattered, let alone all kind of bundled up. And it didn't look like a place where something had sat. It looked like a little perch, if you would, looking out towards the two X structures. And we turned around and looked downward, and there was no way that, from the road that you could see this because you're looking through forest. But from up there were breaks in the trees where you could view the road down below, and you could see the very far side of the meadow. And I don't know if you remember back from 2024, but we had always heard some calls up from that direction. That seemed to be where some of the answering calls came from. And that was also the ridge that whatever ran through our camp and did the Sierra sounds, they went up that same ridge. So here, maybe 120 vertical feet up the hill, we find a little place where it looks like something had sat and watched the road.
And these pine boughs were weaved together. You could see it. I think I sent you a picture of that, but it definitely circled and weaved together to make this whatever. It's not big enough to be like a nest like you talked about, but it definitely looked like something that sat there.
Yeah, you sent me the photo, and it's definitely not natural, and it's not. I was trying to think of like, okay, well, what could this be? And I mean, there's nothing. Bears do make ground nests sometimes, but that's not what they look like. They look like an actual big old pile nest thing. And it certainly wouldn't have one right there that close to the campgrounds. I mean, that's ridiculous.
And, Will started looking around, and I don't know if you know Will, but he, after meeting him in June and then again going camping with him in August, he's very observant. He started looking around, and there were a couple of places, one sort of on each side of the nest, where it looks like something had planted its hands to lift itself up, to stand up, and you could see a couple of finger impressions. So it really did look like something had been using that as an observation post to see down into the meadow and down onto the road. So it was, it definitely, I agree, it didn't look like anything that a bear might make.
Just to reiterate what you're saying, it's also interesting that it just happens to be at a strategic point if you're trying to observe the area.
Yeah. And I don't know how many people believe in X structures, but it was essentially in line with the X that was close to our camp and the other X that we had found halfway up the mountain. And it was a perfect observation point. So whether it was an observation point or not, it was at least the perfect place to put it. And so we kind of went further up, and we ran into a rock wall and couldn't go any further, and it was starting to get dark. So we all came down, and we kind of separated for dinner. And while Will and Marshall were eating dinner, they heard whoops coming from that mountain that we had just come down, and a couple of knocks. So, it was as if something was responding to us being there, 20 minutes earlier. And then we were all sitting around the campfire, and Will heard a rock hit a tree behind our camp, and it was followed by two knocks, and the knocks sounded like they were coming up from that ridge again, not from where, the rock obviously hit our tree, but it sounded like, they heard the whoops, and then we heard knocks later that night. And then that night, multiple barred owl calls kind of at 2:00 in the morning. And again, whether these were owls or not, hard to say, but, it seemed to, those calls both in 2024 and now this year seemed to precede strangeness. And Kandy had something really strange happen about 2 hours after that.
Yeah, I think I had gone to bed before anybody else. It was probably about 10:30, 11. And my routine was in the middle of the night, I always had to get up and go to the bathroom, and I had a specific spot that I would walk down to and take my toilet paper, and I dug a little hole, and then I found this nice-sized rock. And it just kind of reminded me of a small basketball that has been completely cut in half. So it was round like a bowl on the top and then completely flat on the bottom. And so what I would do every night was I would take that rock and put it over my hole with the toilet paper in it. And every morning that I would go out there, my rock would be moved. And it would be set probably 2 to 3 feet away from my little hole. I didn't really think anything about that. And it wasn't until the next day after I had my nice little experience in the tent. I had been, probably awake about 30 minutes, and it was just starting to get light outside. And I was laying there, and I was laying on my right side, and I was looking at David, and I was thinking, how in the world can someone lay on their stomach and snore so loudly?
Thanks.
And I mean, it was just loud. He doesn't usually snore. And I'm laying there thinking this, and all of a sudden I just had something push right in, touched my left thigh, and just kind of came right back out. I immediately started shaking David and telling him, David, something just touched me. And so by the time he woke up, got himself turned over, unzipped, got the flashlight, got out, couldn't see anything. But what I could say is it was not the nose of an animal. It was not pointy. It was flat. And I would say I have a pretty good sized hand for a female. And I would say it felt flat and about the same size as my hand. It did not push in hard. It didn't feel like a threatening touch. It just felt calmly, just pushed into my thigh and just calmly released and left. And that was very scary. I then proceeded to, of course, get David awake, and he got out, didn't see anything. And then I proceeded to take my bags that were in our little tiny tent. I made a wall and went back to sleep. And that's how I slept the last 2 nights, because I did not want something to touch me again.
I mean, first off, hats off to you for not packing up and going home at that point.
I almost slept in the truck, and then I have let David know that we will be purchasing a bigger tent.
Okay, so funny story. Whenever I first got involved in Bigfoot stuff, I was completely new to all of it. I had been camping a few times in my life, but nothing, serious. And so I go out, I buy my tent, my sleeping bag and everything. I'm off to the Bigfoot world. All right. So I set up my little pup tent, and I'm laying there the first night, and my feet are touching the door. My head's touching the back wall. My arms against the side. I can reach out and touch the other wall. And I was like, nope, this is not going to work. I'm going to buy me a bigger tent. So I know exactly what you're talking about. But I mean, so was it like, if this makes sense, a slow touch?
Yes. And whatever it was flat. It was about the size of my hand. That's the best I can explain it.
And you didn't hear anything?
No, unfortunately, with the snoring, I did not hear anything.
Thanks.
Probably 2 to 3 hours prior to that, I was awake and had gone out and went to the bathroom. And I did hear what sounded like maybe some footprints walking around in the camp. But I wasn't about to get out and look. But yeah, I heard they were soft. It was soft walking. It wasn't, whatever it was to me, I wouldn't have thought it was big by any means. But I definitely heard, the best I can describe it would be just someone just lightly walking around.
Whenever you noticed that the rock was being moved, without being too graphic, was anything else disturbed?
No.
Huh.
Nope. It didn't mess with my toilet paper, but the rock was pretty heavy. It was not a small rock. It was pretty heavy. I had to use both my hands so whatever moved it, you would think, because it wasn't on its side, it was not upside down. It had to have picked it up and then set it. It was about 2 feet away from the hole each time. And I really didn't think anything about it. And of course, it wasn't until David and Curtis and Will started talking about it, and David can tell you what they've come up with.
Well, first, David, I want to hear about your reaction to her waking you up saying something just touched me.
I was like, okay, I need to get out and get this. So, I rolled over, I grabbed my, flashlight, my gun, and that I had there, and I unzipped, and I basically stood up, as fast as I could. It was at least 30 seconds. It took her a while to wake me up, but by the time I got up and stood up outside the door of our tent and looked around and was signing things, I didn't see anything with it. But she was pretty frightened about it, when it happened. So I knew it was something that really happened to her, at that time. The thought process that we had, because she didn't tell us about this rock being moved until later, but the process is that I think that whatever was there had smelled whatever, odor in, and probably that's why it probably came over and pushed on the tent. It probably, had her odor on it, and that's what she, may have felt. That's the only thing we could think about, because it was definitely moving the rock, and it came right to what tent she. It didn't go to Curtis's and Terry's tent. It didn't go to, anyone else's. It went right to her side, right there, coincidentally or not,
I mean, not to creep anybody out, it was probably watching you go to the bathroom. That's my theory, that it was watching camp at night. Like, I mean, they know you're there, and here's a woman, and she comes out of the tent in the middle of the night, and she goes and uses the bathroom. I mean, yeah, the rock being disturbed and everything, I would completely agree. I think it was watching you.
Well, whatever it was came back every night, because it was moved every morning. It didn't just happen one night. It was every night.
And this was the night before Jonathan and Sarah got there. And after they got there, in a few minutes, we have another thing where another little story where something may have been watching us. So you're probably absolutely correct. That a lot of activity where she'd gone to the bathroom was right where those individuals running through that camp doing the Sierra sounds the year before. So it seemed like an area that was frequented by them. And I agree with you. I think something was watching her. The next day, we all, at different times, decided to go for hikes up into the wilderness area. Marshall, Will, and Aaron went on one hike in the morning, and then David and myself and Kandy and Terry went on a hike in the afternoon. And at one point of our hike, we all passed or came out near the trailhead at the end of the meadow. And so all 7 of us had been there, and everything looked normal, so to speak. The next morning, the morning that Sarah and Jonathan eventually arrived, I woke up pretty early, about 5:30, and I wasn't going back to sleep. So I got up and decided to hike down and walk into that trailhead again, because there's a trail that goes into the wilderness at the end of the meadow. And Will was camped down there, and when I got down there, he was kind of sitting out near his fire, and we briefly talked, and I said, I'll be back in 10 or 15 minutes. I'm just going for a quick walk. And I walked down to the end of the meadow where the trailhead was, and now there were 2 5 or 6 foot long branches laying on the ground in an X pattern. And to our knowledge, none of the 7 of us had seen it the day before. And, this is something that was pretty obvious. I mean, I saw it right away when I got close to the trailhead. I went and got Will, asked him if he remembered seeing it the day before. He had not. And once everybody was up, we asked everybody. Nobody had seen it. But now all of a sudden, I think the last hike was around 4:30 or 5 in the evening. Now 12 and a half, 13 hours later, there's all of a sudden an X right by the trailhead. And we've even gone back and looked at videos that people have taken. I think Will did a drone video for B-roll for his videos, and he took off almost in that exact spot, and you can actually see one of the sticks off to the side. It was nowhere near where we ended up finding it, and there somehow was now another stick forming an X. So we were the only ones, as David said, in the whole meadow. Were there people camping a quarter mile away? Yes. Could somebody have come in the evening and put down an X on the ground? I suppose. But, they would have had to either gone right past all of us to do it or gone through the wilderness at night to do it. So it was just kind of the last strange finding before Sarah and Jonathan arrived.
I mean, a group full of people out Bigfooting don't notice an X. Highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Highly unlikely.
Exactly. And at the time we didn't, other than seeing the X there, the location really didn't, stand out to us. But something happened in August at an exact location. So, once we came back in August, we kind of put two and two together that probably something had been right at the end of the trailhead watching all of us. So it gets back to that watching thing that you talked about.
Yeah, when we get there. So later that day, Jonathan and Sarah arrived. They got in the late afternoon, Friday. And when they got settled, they came over, and it was nice to meet them. And we all had a good time around the campfire, telling stories and things like that. She did a recording of that and put it in her Celeste Sasquatch channel, so that she has a good video, of that time. But about 11:30, we were, Will's there, Marshall's there, Aaron's there. We're all there camping. There's no one missing, and we heard a tree knock behind our camp from that direction, that we've been talking about, where, Kandy would go out there and go pee and in that same direction behind the bear box. And about 5 minutes later, I think I sent you a picture of the meadow.
Yeah.
But the tree, if you're looking from our camp in that meadow on the left, to the left, we heard a snap, a branch break over there. And it wasn't that, long of a time from when we'd heard a knock from behind our camp. And so, it was about 100 yards in the opposite direction. And so Will and me, all of us, we went over towards the tree line with our thermals, and we're looking in that area. And what was interesting, Will started speculating, and he was like, you know what? Let's just assume that was a Bigfoot over there with the tree knock. It did not have time to come over here without us hearing it going through the woods over here to a branch, do a branch break over here. So if we're making an assumption that there's two of them, he speculated, I think we're going to hear another response back over in that direction pretty soon. So we all went back to the camp, and within 5 minutes, we heard another knock in this direction that he thought it was going to come from. Huh. So that was pretty weird. All of a sudden, once we're standing around and we heard that other knock, we're like, yep, okay, Will knows what he's talking about. And then the motion light went off. His camp was at the end of the meadow where we had camped the previous year. And we were in the camp where those two guys, where the pack went through the year before. But we saw his motion light go off in his camp, and he goes, my light just went off. So we grabbed our thermals and we started looking down that direction. He went down to investigate it. But he had it set up where it wasn't just going to go off, and it wasn't windy. But for some type of motion, it wasn't going to be a branch moving or things like that. Didn't find anything when we were there. I was looking through my thermal, and to that left side of the meadow, I saw a heat motion come out and go back in. And I didn't know what it was. I couldn't say what it was, but I saw this motion about 3/4 of the way down the meadow in the tree line, come out, and just for a split second. And it wasn't long enough to be able to do size or anything like that in the handheld that I was looking at, but it was interesting to see that at the same time as when Will had seen his motion light go off, and we started looking at that. So that's how that night ended with all that going on.
How far away from the motion light was the heat signature?
It's straight across the meadow, probably about 50 feet. It was, it was right directly across, from, it was right in the same. If I was in August of this year, I went and put a thermal camera in that area in the tree line, and it was right in that area that I had seen this quick motion, just a heat in and heat, out and back in, type thing.
Right.
So something set off the motion down there, with it.
And left a heat signature.
Yep. Just a flash of a heat signature there.
So the next day was our last full day in June, and Sarah and Jonathan did all of their interviews, and people can go to their channel and Will's channel because he did some interviews. But we kind of gathered again about 10:30 around our campfire at our same campground, our campsite. And that night we heard a couple of whistles right behind the camp, and that was about it. Nothing else happened. And so eventually we all went to bed about 12:30, 1:45. And then about 1:50 in the morning, David and I were in different tents, but the next morning we talked about it. We were both awakened by multiple barred owls. There go those crazy barred owls again. But there were probably 3 or 4 of them at various distances from our camp. And I think I sent that audio to you. And they went for about 4 minutes, but right in the middle of it, there was this high-pitched noise that we have on audio, and we've had it cleaned up a bit. And the next morning when David and I talked about it, and it probably lasted for maybe 5 or 10 seconds, but when we talked about it, we thought that it had been monkey chatter, like, ooh, ee. Now on the audio, you can't hear that. You just hear something, loud and high pitched. It almost sounds like a shriek. But we had thought we had heard monkey chatter the night before, and that was kind of we thought the end of our trip. Nothing else really happened that night that we know of, and the next day we all turned around and went home. But about a week or two after that June trip, and we weren't going to mention this, but I think I can mention it now because Will said something about it on his channel actually yesterday. He has a video that was taken at 12:30 that night when we were still all around the camp before we'd all gone to bed. And I won't say much about it because I'll let him on his video.
Yeah, it's his video to do it, but it was very interesting.
He did say in his video yesterday something about a peaker, and he kind of left it as a tease for his next video. So your thing about them watching us while we're in camp definitely happened on that June trip.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, we won't describe the video. I'll just tell people to go to Will's channel in a week or two, and I'm sure it'll be up there. But David and I have both seen it. It's interesting.
That was just one trip out of 2. So, Kandy, where did you stand after that trip? Were you still on the fence, or?
Well, I enjoyed being their bait.
Yeah.
I think it worked well. And I have to admit that I'm probably pretty much a believer now. There's just too many things we heard, the footprints we found, being touched, too many things that you can't just say, oh, that's nothing. Oh, that was a bear. No, think I probably would have heard the bear. I've been around enough bears out camping, and I know what they sound like. And so for me, I was very impressed. I was impressed with how Curtis and David are very serious when we are out there. There's no talking. You got to walk when they tell you to walk. And, you just kind of need to stay in line with what they're doing. And I have to just say it was very eye-opening. I had an awesome time. And I could go do this all summer now. I really enjoyed it.
David, it sounds like she's hooked.
Yeah.
I think she is.
Just a bigger tent. We're good.
Interestingly enough, Will tells about an episode where he got touched during his tent. So for those of you who follow Will's channel, he usually hangs a big Bigfoot flag wherever he goes. And on the last day when we were leaving in June, he got out of his vehicle as he was leaving and walked over to our camp holding this thing all folded up. And he gave it to Kandy. He said, you've been anointed. You deserve my flag. And so she has a souvenir from Gypsy Meadows in June.
Yes, I do.
I mean, I just hope you understand, Kandy, that there's like a million people out there that would love to be in your position. And that's one of the most amazing first trips into the Bigfoot world that I've ever heard.
Yeah. It's one of those where you almost feel silly telling everybody about it, but it was real. It happened, and I don't know what it was, but it happened, and I'm more than ready to go out and see if it'll happen again.
The last time I checked, June and August aren't that far apart.
No.
I thought you guys usually space these trips out a little bit farther than that.
Well, we do. We normally did it once a year, and from 22 to 24, we had over a year gap, 2 year gap in that. But we had discussed before, that we had so much happen to us in 2024 in August. With what I only described as Sierra sounds and all that we didn't know what was going to be happening with, going with Will and Sarah and all these people. And we're just going up there and videotaping what had happened before, that we had decided we were going to plan to go back in August, with Curtis and me. So we had that kind of planned already, but there was so much activity, in June that, when we went in August, we had, I got a hold of Will and said, "Hey, we're coming back up. Do you want to come join us?" And he said, "Yeah, he'd love to." And there was, that what we're talking about, he wanted to recreate something. And, it was good that we were all up there together. So he came up there, he invited another friend of his who had been a Bigfoot researcher in that. He lives in that area, Bill Bisson and his wife. They got there a few days before we did and had been camping in that area. And then when Will came, and they camped in the site, in that little campsite that we had talked about before last year, where the gentleman whose name now we know is Randy Luke, he had his camper there, and he's the one that we talked about that had said, "I think I saw a Bigfoot."
Yeah.
And had walked across there. And so Randy had been watching Will's and Sarah's video, and he was like, "I know that I was there. I was that guy," And so he was all excited, and he had, and watching those videos, he had learned that we were coming back in August. We had stated that. And so he came back up and had camped in that exact same site. When we got there, he was there, and him and Bill were camped right across the road from each other. And then when Will came in, he camped across, and the next camp over. in that outside camping area right by the bathroom. So when we got there, there was actually a ton of people in the meadow. There were horse people who had been working on trails and stuff, but they were all packing up, and they left like 45 minutes after we got there, and then the meadow was empty for us. So we went down to the original campsite that we were at in 24 and camped in the same spot there. But it was cool that Randy came back. And what's interesting, Will did a interview with him that he posted on his channel now. You can watch that. But he basically told the story that we had been, what we had said on the podcast, we had assumed and thought that he said the Bigfoot walked from the creek area by the bathroom and out. And he basically said, no, that's not what happened. He said it was walking along the forest and the road that comes out from the meadow. And as when I went into the bathroom, Curtis went around and back into the campsite. It went out there and stopped and then walked back into the forest. And from what we were thinking about was that it was actually tracking us as we were walking out from the meadow, and it probably followed us all the way from our camp all the way out to that bathroom. And then it couldn't go any further because it was open area and there was campsites there. But did a recreation on size, and it was a lot bigger than any of us were when we were walking. But people can go watch that on Will's channel, Return to Gypsy Meadows Part 2, at Grassman 58. And that's an interesting interview, for that. But he kind of corrected that part of the story for us. And then it started making a little more sense on what was going on. But what amazing me is that Curtis and I we don't walk down the road loud talking, making noises. We're walking down the road looking for things. We're checking, we're looking around. We're trying to, you never know what's going to happen. So, but whatever we walk down that road, we didn't notice this thing was following us. And I was like, man, we really got to step up our game if we're missing something like that. That's tracked us all the way from our camp, and we couldn't know that it was there. That was pretty amazing.
I keep on coming back to the same thought in my head as I'm listening to all this. They're watching all the time.
Yes.
yes, they are.
and in a little bit you'll hear, even more that gives you that impression. That night we got smart. We set out audio recorders. We weren't so smart the year before and never got the Sierra sounds. But that very first night in our camp, after we reviewed it when we got home, David found something interesting that happened about 2:00 in the morning.
That was, I don't know. I bought we went down and, I got a thermal camera. Curtis got a thermal camera. I got multiple recorders. So we were really trying to get equipment up to cover this area. So up above the camp, there is a weather rain collection station that they have up there. And they have a post there with a sign, "Don't disturb." So I just go up there, and it's up on a ridge, and it's a pretty good area for the whole surrounding area of that forest. And I put a recorder up on the post up there. It's pretty good place to have it. And I get this recording, and I have probably 10 of these things, and there's like a bang that goes on. And I don't know how to describe it. I sent you the audio on it, but that one bang, I probably have 10 of those. And Will recorded one also as a bang. It's almost like a loud drum, like a single drum beat. And I have about 10 of those types of sounds through the night. And one of them, all of a sudden, I'm hearing right before the bang, I hear this, I can only describe it as a female or a young kid talking. And I don't recognize the language. I don't understand it. But then there's a loud bang, and then there's more talking. And I don't even know how to describe it. But it's definitely a young or a female voice and multiple vocalizations right after before and after that bang. I don't know if you're able to hear it or not, but it was very, very strange. And I go, there's no females out there walking in the middle of 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's out in the wilderness area. It's like, who's going to be coming out there and talking around my recorder?
Yeah,
at that time of night. So I don't know what that is, but it was definitely a strange voice talking in a young female pitch voice with that.
Yeah, and of course we hadn't heard it. We only heard it when we got back into town and listened to the audio. But the next morning after breakfast, we decided to go out into the wilderness across the creek, and we were probably only 200 feet away from camp, and right in the creek bed in some kind of pebbly, sandy area, David found a 12-inch bare footprint that you could see toes in. We ended up scanning it and casting it in, but just to put in perspective the size, 12 inch doesn't sound that big. David and I both wear a size 13 shoes, and our feet are about 11 and a half inches. So something with a size 14 or so foot was walking barefoot near the creek. And then later that day, a lady came into camp, and she camped at the end where in June we had all that activity. And she had a horse trailer with 2 horses and 2 little dogs. And we were kind of wondering, are these horses going to be bad for business? Are the dogs going to be bad for business? Are they going to be good for business? What's the deal? But that kind of comes into play a little later on. But she came in that day. That second evening was pretty quiet. We don't remember hearing much, and there wasn't a ton on our audio. But around 3 a.m, David had bought a motion light similar to Will's, and again, it hadn't really gone off most of the week that we were there, or most of the time we were there. But at 3 a.m, it went off, and David and I could hear footsteps in and around the camp. The crazy thing is we have thermal on the meadow. We got game cameras in our camp looking out. We got a thermal up on the ridge. We got audio recorders going. Nothing showed up. So it's, for whatever reason, I know there's always been a lot of speculation as to whether they can sense electronics, but both that time and later things that happened this week, it seems that they always found dead zones. If it was a Sasquatch walking through our camp, they seem to find dead zones. They're either the luckiest things in the world or the smartest things in the world, one of the two.
Yeah, it's so weird. I don't even know. I don't want to even start speculating. I don't have an answer.
Right. We've all heard, various theories, and obviously nobody knows. But with all that went on, other than the Will's video that he's going to, post in a week or 2, we don't have anything on video with everything that went on both weeks. So it is kind of crazy.
But so Tuesday evening, we were just at camp playing cards. We couldn't have a fire again. It was fire restricted. And all of a sudden, Will comes down to our camp, and around 9 o'clock, and he told us that he had just heard a large tree break behind his tent near the creek. And then he had a real loud whoop at that point. So we at that time decided let's go set up our thermals for the night. We were still learning our thermals, not knowing how long they're going to last. So we decided we would set them up right before we went to bed, and they'd go all night. So we had do that in 2 different areas, and we were overlooking the whole meadow and one up on the ridge behind our camp with it. So while we're setting up our thermals, all of a sudden we hear a loud knock from the previous area where we, in 224, we had left gifts, like apples and, peanut butter in that area. But from that same direction is about 100 yards, to the northeast of that area. So then we decided to sit out in front of the truck for a while. And we just sit out there quiet, and we have a parabolic that I record on one of my recorders. And we ended up hearing 4 whoops from that same direction that we had heard the knocks. And then all of a sudden we start getting these strange barred owl calls, and they're trying to be barred owls, but they're not. And they're calling back and forth. And then all of a sudden we get these multiple, I can only describe them as duck sounds in the same direction as the first knock. And I'm going, what, we got ducks now in the middle of the forest? and Curtis was like, yeah, we're hearing duck sounds. There's probably about 6 or 7. I think I sent you that audio.
Yeah.
On there. I don't know how to describe it, but it was just like these duck sounds or vocalizations of something trying to mimic it. But so we heard 2 different whistles, at that time in the tree line. And then there was another whoop down by the creek. We heard another knock coming from the gifting site area. And so that was a strange, I was glad I got it on audio, because I don't think, hey, what the heck are these? We have ducks and there's no water around like that. There's no pond for these ducks to be out there. So when I listen real close to the audio, I'm hearing a mixture of barred owl calls, whoops, duck sounds, all mixed together. And I'm going, it's like they're having a party of birds out there in the middle of the woods.
They seem to be pretty vocal in that area.
Yeah.
In California, we had no vocalizations that we know of. And in Washington, we've had a ton of them. And again, some of them may be actual owls and maybe even ducks, but a lot of vocalizations every time we've been to Gypsy Meadows. We kind of sat around out in front of David's truck for an hour or two till that all quieted down, and then we went to bed. And about 5 a.m., we heard rain starting to fall, and we just bought these thermals, so we just both got up, we heard the rain, and decided to go get our thermals. And after we brought in our thermal, we heard an owl again kind of going off down near that same gifting area where we'd heard everything the night before. And then a whoop came from that area. And then, just opposite where that other campsite was that we were in June, we heard a whistle. So at 5 in the morning, we started hearing all these things and brought in all our equipment, and eventually it quieted down, and David went back to bed, and I decided to go for a walk. And the sun up, it wasn't until 5:56, and so now it's probably 5:30, 5:35. Still pretty dark. You might see a little bit of light, but it was pretty dark. And I walked down by that bathroom area, and my plan was just to walk the same loop I had done when the thing kind of followed us out of the woods the year before, and just to get a walk. I wasn't expecting anything to happen. As I got to the main road, I looked to my right down where Will's campground was, and I thought I saw Will standing out in front of his camp. And we later lasered this distance. It was 80 yards, and a little bit of twilight, but you couldn't tell colors. But I saw from about the abdomen up, standing behind a bush, something lightly colored. And Will has this light colored jacket, and I thought he had been up and just, listening or standing. So I waved, and doggone it, Will didn't wave back. And I didn't think anything of it. I was 80 yards away, and he didn't see me, and I knew I was going to make the loop and be back there maybe 45 seconds later. And when I came around, Will wasn't there and nothing was there. I then spent probably the next 15, 20 minutes looking all around, trying to, see where game cameras were, see if they would have caught this. All 3 guys were in their separate campgrounds, still in their beds, and this thing wasn't there. And eventually, I probably looked around a total for maybe about a half hour. Will eventually got up. I asked him if he had been up earlier and standing in his camp, and he said no. But about an hour before that, he said something set off his motion light, and then he saw a shadow on his tent. The shadow didn't come very high, and he thought maybe it had been a bear, so it didn't really, excite him enough to get out of bed. And then, I saw what I saw, and eventually, once it got light and everybody was around, we recreated it. I went back to the area, had David stand behind the bush that I had seen this thing from about mid-abdomen up, and David is 6'4", and I only saw him from about armpits up. So we had David kind of lift his arm to see about how high I thought the thing was. And, when I saw it earlier from 80 yards away in the dark, my brain didn't process how tall this thing was. But when David started lifting his hand, we figured it was probably somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall. We then started looking around, and we found a little trampled area where it had probably stood. And again, it was in a dead zone between all of our cameras. And to our knowledge, no one else was around. Everybody had been asleep except me. And the thing about the light color, if you remember back to 2024, Randy had seen a tan-colored Bigfoot. So in my mind, my brain went to seeing this light color standing in front of Will's camp. It's got to be Will. But, it clearly wasn't Will that had been standing there.
That's crazy.
Yes. Yeah. The things that had just happened, happened to us. We're either the luckiest guys in the world or whatever, but it's just amazing the things that happen. But it gets maybe not better, but other things happen too.
So, well, the one thing that Kerry didn't mention that we figured out the height because he had seen this branch with moss across it, and that was how he was judging where the top of it was, and my hand was just barely reaching up to that when I put it above my head, for that. But that afternoon, all 5 of us, we went across the creek on a hike, and Will found a 12.5-inch print that he casted, and we scanned it. And it definitely had toes on there. And he has a video on his channel where he shows, him casting that and what it looked like, after that. But that was in the sand. It was pretty easy to see the toes on that print. Later on, we found out that lady in her meadow with her 2 dogs, one had been missing for a while. And apparently what had happened was when she'd gone out on trail rides, she came back and went down to the creek with her dogs and her horses to water them. And she had a kind of a feral dog. And all of a sudden it got really scared and like trembling and took off. And it wouldn't come back to the camp for a couple of days. And we'd seen it every once in a while out on the road. But she couldn't get the dog to come back to camp. After she had been taking them down to that creek that we see everything coming from. So that was one other interesting thing that happened with her there.
The dog would rather stay outside in the forest than go back near the creek. So we don't know what it sensed, but that was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So we decided we were going to do a night hike, and we went up gated off forest road up to I guess there's a historic copper mine camp there, and we hiked up. We found a couple buildings there. It was interesting doing a night hike. We hadn't really done something like that. We did something with Kandy up a road, but this was a little different. But that night we get back to camp, we had some more knocks that were going off while we're setting up our thermals. And then Will heard him as well, but his camp was about 1/8 of a mile away. Then he heard a screech, but he thought that screech might have been a cougar. It was kind of a cougar sound that night. But the next day, we're getting towards the end, and then we hike up to back in 24, we'd found these 16.5-inch prints with a, 48 to 50 foot step length. And I said, we got to go back up there and look around. So we go up there, and this time we find two 15.5-inch prints. I think I sent you the picture of one at the wet in the heel area. And Curtis measured those out, and the step length, I think, was it like 60, Curtis?
Yeah, which is crazy.
It's like 60 inches to the next step in the marsh. So that was 60? A huge step length. 60.
60. And we couldn't see where it had stepped in between, and it was all marshy. So if it had stepped, we think we would have seen it. Now, I suppose it's possible it, pushed off and did more than just a step. It did a little bit of a leap, but 5 feet is a crazy step distance.
Yeah.
But the print didn't look like a,
right.
Try to read prints, you're going to see like a disc or a dish or an explosion for that. And there was nothing like that in the print. The print was a normal step with a, just a, like a normal walking. But I was going, are you serious? At 60 inches, but that was a huge step length, from there. And I don't know, from our experience in 22 in California, we know that the marsh absorbs, footprints. And so maybe one was absorbed again. I can't say that it didn't, but from the two that we saw there was 60 inches, from there.
I don't know the exact formula off the top of my head, but I'm trying to rack my brain to remember how that would equate to a possible height, and it's getting up there.
Well, Curtis can talk about that.
I didn't look up 60, but 48 inches is what we found the year before. And, in orthopedics, we have gait analysis studies, and a 48-inch, assuming it's just a normal walking step and not a jump or running step, assuming it's a walking step, 48 inches equates to 9 feet 6 inches.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
60
for a human.
Would for a human, right? We don't have no idea on a Bigfoot, and of course there aren't any 9 foot 6 inch tall humans. But if it was a human, it would equate to 9 feet 6 inches having a 48-inch stride. So, our next to last morning was Saturday morning, and I woke up about 5:30, and I didn't know that David had experienced something the night before. So why don't you tell him what you'd experienced, David, and then I'll go on with what I did in the morning.
I got woken up, about 2:30 in the morning, heard a couple whistles. I got up, looked around camp, went to the bathroom and then went back to bed. And while I was getting back settled, all of a sudden, about 20 minutes later, I smell this bad sulfur smell. It was to the right of my tent, and it was only there for about 3 to 4 seconds, and then it just disappeared. And I was going, that was nasty, but then it was gone. And I was going, okay, did something just come by and I get a whiff of it, but I didn't know where that came from or what it was, but it wasn't anything that lingered. It was just in passing, this odor that was like right by the right side of my tent.
And I had slept through all of that. I didn't know till after he got up that had occurred, but I woke up about 5:30, and usually what I did was I got up early. I went and brought the thermals in because they were running low on batteries, and sometimes I'd go change the batteries on our audio, and so David's thermal that day was sort of out in the middle of the meadow, looking down across the rest of the meadow. And I went out and picked it up and brought it back to under our awning. And instead of going to get my thermal up the ridge, I decided I wanted to brush my teeth. So I kind of walked down the gravel driveway into our camp. And then about halfway down the driveway, I took a right towards where I kept my toothpaste in the bear box. And right when I got to the bear box, I heard this thud and then a clack, clack. and clearly a rock had been thrown and landed in the dirt, sort of maybe 10 feet from me, and then bounced into the gravel driveway. So I turned around and kind of scanned with my eyes the tree line, and then I said, well, you know what, I'm going to get David's thermal that I just got back in and turn on and kind of scan the tree line, and I didn't find anything, but I set the thermal up in case something was hiding behind a tree, and I think here's where I learned both in thinking that thing I saw was real out there at 5:30 in the morning, and now with this rock throw, I have to learn to think out of the box. They can do things that humans can't do. I pointed that thermal at the closest place across the meadow that was maybe 25 or 30 yards away, figuring that that's where something most likely was throwing something at us. And then I kind of sat down and kept an eye on the area, and then I heard a knock up the ridge behind us, and a whistle down at the other end of the meadow, but we never saw anything on thermal. And shortly after that, David eventually got up, and I told him what had happened, and he told me that just 2 hours before he smelled that bad smell. And then I stayed in camp, and David walked out to the tree line where I thought that the rock had come from. And, I kind of videoed him, and pretty soon he was lost in the trees, and I couldn't see him very much. And next thing I knew, he kind of came out over by the trailhead where we had found that X back in June.
Yeah, so when Curtis told me that, I was I want to go see what I could find, where it come from. Kind of wondering about, the angle or the things, where the rock would come up on that area. But I go into the tree line, I follow the game trail down, and I come on out, and I'm standing there looking and trying to say, okay, where would this thing throw? And I found this area where I think, this open area behind this tree that would be perfect for throwing, and you could just step out and make a throw and then just kind of duck back in this area. So then I started looking a little closer in that area, and I find a fresh 16.5-inch by 15.5-inch print there, same size as we had before the prior year. And there's two of them. One was I could see really clear. I scanned it. I think I sent you the scan on it. But I could see where something had stepped on a branch that had pulled up a pine cone. The left side was a full straight ridge, pressure release, in there. And you could I could see toes in it. And it was definitely, it stepped there. It had a lot of pressure on it. And then the second one was off to the side. And I think when it saw Curtis leave and go to the bear box, which was not visible from that angle, it went up to this open area where the tree was covered. And I think that's where it threw a rock. But it was like a fresh print. But it was a perfect spot, for me. I'm going to throw it. And the angle was right to where it would land on the dirt and then roll onto the driveway where the rocks were.
And we went ahead and lasered that distance. And here's where I say we have to think out of the box. It was 51 yards, and the rock was, I don't know which of the 10,000 rocks in the gravel driveway the rock was, or I'd have a souvenir as well. But you can't. A human just can't throw a rock that size 51 yards. In fact, David and we have a video of us trying to throw a rock, and we both probably threw it about 35 yards just because the rock doesn't have that much weight. It's not like throwing a baseball or anything like that that's bigger and more weight. And that's why when I heard the thud, I'm just thinking in terms that I know, not what I don't know. And I looked at the closest place. I wish I had scanned the whole tree line. Who knows if I would have seen the thing looking at us through that area. But that was the exact area that X was found in June. So, getting back to it seems like they were always watching us. I agree. Both in June and in August, something always seemed to be watching us.
Yeah. So I think I sent you our video of when we were trying to document that.
Yeah. When you're 9 feet tall and you've got, a 60-inch stride, you've got a different perspective. Different vantage points, different throwing angles, all sorts of things.
Yeah. But one of my, I was thinking about that, and with my interest in Native American sign, what I realized is that Curtis had actually communicated with the Sasquatch when he waved at it. The Sasquatch didn't know that Curtis didn't recognize it, but he knew that Curtis had seen it when he waved at it, but Curtis kept walking away in different directions. And it was, after the rock throw, I'm wondering if that, he wasn't throwing to hit him. He threw it when Curtis had gone out of sight, over to the bear box. But I'm wondering if there was some communication or to make contact or something. I'm not sure what happened, but maybe the same thing happened when they threw a rock by my hammock. I did go, when I went into the woods, looking for that area, I did try to do some native sign into the woods, hey, we're good people. We speak the truth, come counsel with us, things like that. No one came, but, that's what I was trying to do at that time. That night at 3:00, my motion lights went off, and we had decided, okay, I'm going to go put my thermal in the trees on a large game trail. And right from that area where my camera was, all of a sudden I got something just went off, and it was like angry barred owls. If you put anger into it, just hooting, it was angry, and it just started hooting and took off and was moving and went towards our gifting area, and it went on it looked like it kept going all the way to the game area, then curled back across the creek. It went on for about 15 minutes, and it was angry sounds. It was weird. And I think it might have walked into and found my thermal and got mad, and then took off and went that whole big circle for about 15 minutes, just going off with this angry voice and angry sounds in that same direction that we had heard the quote ducks or whatever, in that. So something happened and something got angry at that.
All of this is just kind of very reminiscent of other locations that I've experienced and heard about in the past. Usually in a very similar setup as what you guys are talking about, these type of campground areas.
Yeah, and this is the most remote campground in the area. It's the last one before you get to the wilderness. So literally across the creek is the Salmo Priest Wilderness. And as David had said earlier, Will sort of has a hypothesis based on where he's encountered things, a mile and a half down the road or 2 miles down the road, that up in that hill, they may be staying in caves or old mines or something like that. Obviously, nobody knows, but just across the creek from the last campground on the road is the Salmo Priest Wilderness. So, very interesting, at least.
You mentioned that road where you guys went and checked out that historic site that was old copper mines with some buildings.
Yeah, that was down by Camp 16. That was a lot further down towards Sullivan Lake area.
Is that a location where like a lot of people go to look at it and stuff?
I don't know. It looked like there was some information on a board there and stuff, but the road itself was gated off at that time. So I don't know if they open it up at certain times of the year and people go up there. But at that time, we just parked at the gate and then walked all the way in.
Did you notice any trash cans up there?
No, I didn't.
No, I didn't either.
Usually they have trash cans if there's a lot of people that travel to the area.
like David said, they kind of had an information sign, and then when you got closer to the buildings, it said there was kind of a warning: these are historical buildings. Please don't, deface them and stuff like that. But no, I don't remember any trash cans.
How far is that location from the rain collection station you were talking about?
Well, the rain collection was only about 30 yards up on the ridge from our camp. The copper mine trail that we went up was about a mile and a half, 2 miles down towards Sullivan Lake.
I'm just thinking about the thumping sound.
Oh,
yeah.
I guess it could be if it's loud enough. Sound carries in at night. So,
yeah, that would be a long ways away.
Yeah,
it would be.
Will recorded the same sound from his camp that he put on one of his videos. I just heard it today, and mine was louder. So I think the direction of where it's coming from was further to the northeast from our camp, because Will's was quieter than mine, and he picked up the same sound on his kernel.
It just sounds like for sure that. I mean, this is all speculation. Disclaimer: this part will probably be edited out, but I'm gonna say that the tan one is a sentry that watches that campsite area. And you guys are encountering it every year. And I think that others move through that area, and that's why that sentry is there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, and the moving through, makes sense with what David had heard with the Sarah sounds the year before. Something had moved through the camp, and he heard at least, I think you said at least 3 different individuals. Is that right, David?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it very well may be a trackway for them. That's very possible.
If there was some way for you guys to go into that area and try to race to that spot where you found those pine boughs on that overlook and try to beat it to that spot, you might see one.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It probably took us, this thing was at about a 40 or 50 degree angle. It probably took us 20 minutes to get up to that pine bough. Yeah. And, obviously they're more athletic than we are. And 20 minutes, they have enough warning to be gone.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if one was sitting there, it saw us coming from almost literally a mile away. In the as I said, you could see a portion of the meadow, the far portion of the meadow, and that's where David and I were camped. And Will came and got us. It's possible it even saw Will come get us, and then pretty soon it heard us kind of stomping up the hill, and it could have been 5 miles away by the time we got up there.
Well, like how you guys were earlier talking about, your original trip to the Gifford Pinchot and hearing the owls and the similarities with the owl stuff going on. The same exact thing goes on here in Oklahoma and other parts of the southern United States, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama for sure, Tennessee, Arkansas, also with barred owls. So there's definitely something going on. It's not just coincidence.
That's interesting.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but there's something with the owls. And I will say that in a particular location in Oklahoma, we definitely thought that they were in this particular campground, that they were following the raccoons in at night.
Oh.
The raccoons would come in and raid campsites and trash cans and stuff. And
right.
There were a few times where it seemed like activity kind of followed the raccoons into the campsites, which the idea that something that large would use such small animals to try and conceal itself or mask its location seems kind of ridiculous, but I don't know. Just little things I take mental note of over the years.
Well, it's definitely been our experience the 3 times we've been to Gypsy Meadows, and like you said, the one time you didn't get to the show, which I think is like 250 miles away, give or take. So yeah, I mean, we've heard weird noises and activity too that all followed what sounded like barred owls or even weird barred owls or weird barred owl sounds. So we've definitely, in our limited experience, found that too.
So do you guys got plans to return, or is Will going to be doing ongoing research?
I hope so.
Well, yeah, Will only lives about an hour and a half away, so he periodically goes all around. He has multiple spots that he goes to, so it's not just up Sulfur Creek, and I'm sure he'll be up there. Yeah, David and I were talking about that. We had so much activity at Sullivan Creek area that it's hard not to go back to Gypsy Meadows. Interestingly enough, the night that you, I, and David were all texting back and forth as to what was a good night to do this interview, we finally pinned down a date and time. 2 hours later, the guy who was on your Skookum Valley podcast, number 151, texted me and he said, "Hey, what are you and David doing in the springtime? We're going to get a few guys together to go near Gifford Pinchot and do some exploration." So we might join that trip as well.
Oh wow! I think David might have to find a place closer. I don't know if Kandy is going to wait a year to go back to places.
Well, I'll tell you,
you can just go up north, up Klamath area.
Well, David's even thinking about going further away, aren't you, David?
Going where?
Further away.
Oh, yeah. So my son Cody is a total skeptic and thinks that we're whack doctors out in the woods, but he wants us to come out to South Carolina and take him out so he can hear these sounds that we keep saying we're hearing. And there's a lot of, I've been doing a little research about that in Georgia. They're having a lot of sightings out in that North Georgia, Tennessee area.
Oh, are they?
So we're thinking of that area for a trip with Cody.
Well, what Cody doesn't understand, we've been extremely fortunate. Most people don't go out 4 times and have something happen every single time, and probably the next 20 times we go somewhere, we didn't have things happen. But he part of the reason I think he thinks we're crazy is just because all this stuff that has happened. But I don't know how else to explain the things that we've seen, we've heard, we've smelled, we've had thrown at us. Like I said, we've been touched. We've been extremely fortunate in our 4 trips to have crazy things happen every single time.
I have been contacted by a local couple hunters, and they want to get together with me and tell me their story, but they have an area they say is really active. It's closer to here. So your answer to finding something closer might come into effect too.
Well, once you get hooked, it's hard to get unhooked.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, luckily, Curtis is retired, and he has all the time to go and do all this research on YouTube. Still working, but
aren't you in Arizona?
I am. So I usually fly to Sacramento. David drives 2 hours to Sacramento, and then we drive 14 more hours to Gypsy Meadow. So it's a 16-hour drive for David, and a 14-hour drive and a 2-hour plane trip for me. So, yeah, it's a little hard to get there It's a little ways to get there, but every time it's been worth it.
Well, they are in Arizona.
Yes, the Mogollon monster.
Yeah, I've had a few people on the show from Arizona, and especially New Mexico, the Four Corners region. There's lots of activity around there. These things just seem to be pretty much everywhere.
Yep.
Which also adds to the strangeness.
Yes, it does.
Well, guys, I appreciate you coming on. Kandy, thanks for joining them and sharing your experiences. I've enjoyed hearing about it, and you guys need to keep me in the loop. You started the story. I want to hear how it finishes.
It's definitely an ongoing rabbit hole.
If you've had your own experience with Bigfoot or something you can't explain and you'd like to share your story on the podcast, email me at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. Check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. You can find links to social media, past episodes, merchandise, everything you need all in one place. And until next time, remember, there's something in the woods.